Hey guys, Moshi Mochi here, and this is the pilot episode of my Take-Two channel. So, the goals and platform. Take-Two is great, and I want to grow the Take-Two format, or at least give it more exposure. I want to fill the void of the lack of English resources and help people get better at the format. The aim here isn't to be the best, but it's to be a captivating conductor, someone who can provide content to the various discussion topics and get people talking about it, and to push people in the general direction of maybe a certain strategy or a way to play the game, draft a card, stuff like that. So I'm going to give resources in forms of video, visual, and textual forms to cater to all the audiences. So email, Twitter, and Reddit posts is where you can find me for most things. omoshimochi@gmail.com. Same thing for Twitter, and MattyXMochi for the Reddit posts. So there's not going to be a dedicated subreddit for this at the moment, but there may be a Discord in the future, and I'll let you guys know when I set it up. So plans for the channel. I wanted it to be educational on the various aspects of the Take-Two Arena format. So the considerations I had was the streaming/gameplay route. Maybe I'd play for a small live audience at inconvenient times, both for you and me, and I'd post some replay clips here and there. The aim here wouldn't be to place high, but it'd be to provide engaging and informative gameplay. The reason here is I'd have to play the same crafts over and over again, probably doing the same style over and over again, and it would take a lot of time, and I'd rather just push out quality content out. So, and again, it doesn't really help you learn the best, in my opinion. The best way to learn to be good at Take-Two, I feel, isn't to watch someone play it, but to play it yourself. Still, this is going to be a feature that I have every once in a while. So the main thing I'm going to be going at is the pick and other infographics. You guys have seen on my on subreddits and stuff, my pick priority guides. I try to put them out to help people gravitate towards the key cards in each craft. They aren't meant to be a set in stone tier list, like pick this over this if it's on a higher tier than the other one. It's mainly meant to just help people point out the good or key cards craft has in that format. And the advantage I have to doing these now on a video format is I can go over interactions between the cards and the format. So other things I have lined up are stuff like choose options, removal options, storm potential, and much more. I can use the videos to sort of build up the content. And then in the end, I can compile it together as a resource you can read in the very end. Another thing I have working on is just general gameplay strategy. So drafting is half the battle. You might want to know general stuff like what to do in a certain situation, gameplay situations as a whole, stuff like mulligans, chip damage, what the potentially most optimal play is, how to use your evos, either conserving them or burning them really fast, and just adapting your gameplay. Anyway, there's a bunch of stuff to go over here. So there will be plenty of content on that as well. So all this is leading up to a passion project that I've been working on, which is a Take-Two website. I have this planned, but I don't want to push it out because of the fear of not generating enough hype. And that's no fault of the community. Take-Two has been pretty stagnant over the years, even though Shadowverse has been released for a while. There hasn't been really a large push for it in the West, and I feel like that's part of my job, to just get people interested or get people wanting to play the format. So I don't want this to be low effort. The aim here is high quality content where the first article or piece I make is as relevant as the second one, or as the 200th one. I feel like the second article that I push out will probably be the most important one, and people reading this like 2 or 3 years later, that'll probably be the most important piece of content I put out. So this isn't going to be, web developer status tier, but it's going to have a compilation of the works I make, and it's going to have a bunch of useful tools, which I feel like people will appreciate. So I'm also going to do some personal videos, articles, polls, more general stuff in the future. And content takes a while to produce, so, bear with me. It definitely takes time in real life, maintaining priorities. But if you donate, it helps maintain the site, and it pushes out more content at a frequent pace. I don't expect that much, and I don't expect any at all. So this will come out regardless. But if you feel like supporting me, standard stuff, PayPal, Patreon, I'll definitely talk about the website later as it's ready to come out. Alright, so the boring stuff is out of the way, so let's actually get to something like the meat of the topic, which is Take-Two. So Take-Two wants you a short introduction and invitation to the draft format. So a lot of people coming into the game, maybe even veterans of the game, they stick mostly to just ranked. They play rotation, play unlimited, maybe they make some budget decks if they're new players. And then for most people, it's the only way to play. Well, I want to propose maybe something else you can do, which is playing Take-Two. So a problem with not the limited format. The limited format has plenty of problems, but a problem with the constructed formats is sometimes it's stale, or sometimes there are oppressive decks in the game. So I'm going to muse about constructed for a while. So a lot of these decks, maybe they've been tier 0, maybe they haven't, but they all share a couple things in common. So, decks like PTP Rhinoceros or the various rune decks in the format. Maybe dragon decks that ramp, do storms, or maybe some low curve dragon decks. We've had neutral decks in Wonderland Dreams, like stuff like Tove and Line of the Golden City. Those cards have been huge proponents of that deck. We've had stuff we've seen in recent times, like Tenko Shrine, Silva, and Darkfeast Bat. Well, these kind of cards have sort of built decks, had people build decks around them on their own. But another thing that's pretty interesting, which is a segue into actual Take-Two content, is these cards actually aren't very good in Take-Two. So these cards are what I'd like to call synergistic cards, cards that perform exceptionally well in their archetypes when they're supported with their complementary cards. An experiment I'd like to make is a 37 card experiment. Let's say you and a friend are trying to play a casual game, trying to see who can win with a random assortment of cards. If you have 37 cards of a certain craft, and you're given a choice to put in any cards you want, would you put any of these cards into your deck? Well, the answer is probably no, but we got to find out the reason why. So for this experiment, I'm going to use cards like Silva or Darkfeast Bat. So these cards are only as strong as their sum of their parts. They require the right support to truly shine, and they're often low impact or dead weight on their own. So something like Silva, you want a high density of low playpoint cards in order to use Accelerate. You want to be a sort of aggressive deck to make use of its chip damage. And you also want the right collection of cards, maybe something like a Kokoro, in order to actually make use of the card. You don't want like a bunch of fanfares that won't activate because of its effect. You want some on-impact board cards. We've seen stuff like Kokoro or the 3-play.32 that makes a puppet being used because they generate value based on it. So same thing with Darkfeast Bat. You have interactions with the deck. You want to clear board, you want to deal face damage, and you want to stay alive. Those are some main things the deck wants. So you'd have some interactions like maybe Vira into Madness Revealed or Razor Claw. That's not something super unfair that the Darkfeast Bat deck does, but it's definitely part of the deck and something the deck really wants to do. So draft takes away these consistent 3 of lines that you would see supporting these decks, and they don't necessarily always give you the necessary tools to make use of their effects. Because of this, these cards tend to be average to bad in draft, and they pale in comparison to actual good stuff cards. A real thing that I want to stress is these cards are fun and not stressful to play against. So you see a lot of these cards in Constructed, and maybe they might make you want to just stop playing the game in total. Like, you see the opponent maybe high roll some of these out, or you see a certain high power level card on curve, and you really don't want to like play the game anymore sometimes. And to some people, like, I feel like that's a shame because, these are really cool cards, but maybe side games have made them too strong in the constructed formats. But Unlimited, these cards don't really provide such a big problem at times. And I feel like for them, it's not really playing a broken card, it's them making a bad card work. And I put bad in quotation marks because some of these cards are actually good. But them making it work, it's not like a really stressful thing. It's more that you seeing something really cool that the opponent's doing. Maybe they can get the Silva off, or maybe they can get a really big damaged Darkfeast Bat. And it doesn't feel too unfair, even if they get something really amazing off. So if these cards aren't the best cards in Take-Two, what are the stars of the show? Well, in Take-Two, we have a lot of things like neutral options, Lowain, Rackham. You'll learn to hate these cards if you play Take-Two a lot. And these cards have the advantage of being in every draft you see. They help fill the holes in the curve, and they also provide premium options to take. Another thing is soft removal, hard removal. You'll need the soft removal to remove a bunch of small followers or post-evolve followers, and hard removal to just deal with general big stuff that you can't deal with small removal. 2-for-1 fanfare is ping and removal followers, something like a Salome. These things will help you destroy a follower and put a small threat on board. Choose cards. These things let you play something on board and lets you choose a card that's flexible for the situation. Card draw. You can actually outvalue your opponent in Take-Two, just having more cards than the opponent or generating more value off that. Evolve Matters is something like the Dragon Warriors of the format. These cards stay relevant in Take-Two, where you can just win the game off boarding out and tempoing out your opponent. And even the base mechanics, stuff like Bane, War, Drain, Storm, Rush. These things all come together to form Take-Two's board-oriented tempo game plan. So what changes because of Take-Two? No combo, no problem. So we have decks in Constructed where they have some sort of inevitability. If you play a long game versus Mysteria, maybe you get End to the face for 10 plus. Something like Arcus, it can basically lock you out on board with something like a Nicola, and for good measure, it can OTK you with stuff like Gremory or Fairy. But in Take Two, for the most part, there aren't too many combo or high damage finishers in the format. We have stuff like Lions or Prince, which do have their share of problems, but it has counterplay as well. But for the most part, turn 10 and onwards, you can viably play to those turns and not expect to have a giant finisher that consistently goes to your face. And we get to make use of the pack fillers. Basically, everything in the game is viable. Shame about Constructed is you really only play with mainly a small set of cards that are just try to do some unfair things both together or against the format. And a joke with card reviews or just a new expansion coming out is, oh, a lot of this stuff is Take Two filler. But that's true. Take Two filler is very strong. Like, a lot of cards in the format are usable to an extent. And even the cards that aren't usable, you can sometimes make work in niche or fun decks. So this is more of a personal thing, but sort of like the old school Shadowverse, board versus board strategy. There were definitely decks still in the past, like, Roach and Daria, that tried to get an unfair combo or try to vomit a bunch of stuff on board. But I feel like a lot of decks in the past still try to fight for board and just win off board. And that's sort of a kind of old school thing I miss about Shadowverse. And Take Two really allows you to just still play for that board versus board playstyle. Another thing that's highlighted is the knowledge of the card pool. So that's something you'll definitely get out of Take Two, is just knowing what cards are in the format and how to prepare for the format. So in Constructed, you might have some tech cards in the format, something like a Seraphic Blade to deal with like Virus or City of Gold, something like a 2-drop that's problematic. But in some decks, this might be the only hard removal. Like, if you see a meta deck, you might know their cards, basically 90% of the cards plus or minus tech cards. And Seraphic Blade might even be a tech card in that situation. But really, in that format, you don't really have to deal with something like a Pitfall or Divine Retribution. These cards are even more niche cards. They don't really see play in that format, and I feel like that's a shame that, like, so much of the card pool is kicked out of Constructed for not being viable enough, and you don't have to worry about these cards, or you don't get to play around with these cards. So a really nice aspect in Take Two is the variety of the gameplay. You have never in a run am I just monotonously just playing 2-drop, 3-drop, 4-drop. Sometimes that'll end up being the case, but even later in the game, I have a bunch of options in hand, or I'm trying to predict what the opponent's playing. I really have I don't have a clear, concise idea of, what's going to be my turn 6, 7, or 8. Where in Constructed, you might have a very specific game plan or a very specific set of cards that you want on those turns. Alright, so what else changes? So here in Take Two, we got a really personal metagame, and this is something really cool about Take Two. So all Sword all the time. Let's, for argument's sake, say Sword is the best craft in Take Two. So what's the difference? I left Constructed, and then I'm just playing Take Two, and I'm just playing the same 2 crafts over and over again. So in Take Two, what really is the best craft in Take Two? If you see a lot of discussions or threads about it, you'll have people saying various different stuff, saying, maybe Force is the best craft, maybe Haven's the best craft, maybe Sword's the best craft. And they all have great and long posts just talking about their experiences with their crafts, or just having a really good craft and them not performing well with it. Well, this is really based on people's play experience, and they'll have success with different crafts. Really, the beauty of it is it's up to you. You can play a lot of stuff and be viable with it. You can play some really great crafts and not do well with it. And for the most part, a lot of the crafts are balanced around each other. And the metagame changes. It evolves based on your picks and playstyles. Some cards like Gigas or Knight's Way, some person might pick it more than someone else. And then these picks change how well a matchup goes, just because maybe they want more card draw, or maybe a giant big threat is good enough, or maybe it's not good enough versus a specific craft. And stuff like playing slower or playing faster or drafting more early game or going greedier, these things are all variations you can do to your gameplay that changes the metagame around you. And stuff like soft counters and checks. Popular crafts are popular for a reason. Maybe they're very consistent, or maybe they have high power level cards. But something like Shadow can counter Portal because of its silence cards, silencing stuff like Primes for value, or maybe like an aggressive Sword can deal with Havens that are trying to line you out in the late game. Or Forest dealing with Sword by generating enough tokens to deal with the constant Sword threats. Stuff like that and strategies like that make it a very varied metagame in my opinion. And even within crafts, you have a variety of draft archetypes: aggro, mid-range, control, even some niche combos if you can draft them. Maybe some synergistic cards, like I mentioned earlier, can find their way into the mix. So for people who are just going into the format, some sample playstyles and draft styles I have here are just basically outlining all the crafts and just strategies I feel are successful in those crafts. So we got Forest. It tries to lean more aggro. It gets the value when it can, and sometimes it can get some chip damage, and you can just get something like an Azudia or a Sky Horror and just finish them off from there. But for the most part, they're going to be more of an aggressive mid-range deck. Maybe they'll try to just find a niche of just beating out Sword like they usually have. So Sword, like in Constructed, you have a lot of good stuff decks, and then these lean more aggressive when they need to. For the most part, you won't see too many Sword decks or control decks in Sword because they have a lot of aggressive tools to work with, and they aren't usually very good at just staying defensive or just removing all the opponent's stuff. As a joke to Runecraft, I have 2 Abyss, 1 Abyss, 0 Abyss in terms of the craft's viability. Well, unfortunately, Rune falls into sort of a category where its power level scales off the amount of Abyss summoners it has, but it still has a bunch of good stuff you can take. You can have like a bunch of high density evolve cards, like the new 4-drop, which generates the Genius or Drafting Genius on its own. And usually it varies from what you want to pick, maybe Mysteria, Spell Boost, Earthright, or just general good stuff. At the moment, it seems like good stuff and Earthright are the way to go, but, it fluctuates depending on the expansions. But for now, it seems very solid. Just drafting Abyss and a bunch of good stuff, maybe some Earthrights to complement it, and you should have a pretty good deck. Dragonwise has always been flipping between sort of a high curve and a low curve. For personal experience, low curve works better, but you can draft definitely some big stuff in a mid-range sort of control shell. Ramp doesn't really work because you have to draft the threats, and you also have to draft like removal and the ramp, and you have to draw them in a good order. For Shadow, you really have sort of a mid-rangey game plan, just sort of value everyone out, grind everyone out with your last words and your high-value fanfares and spawns, stuff like that. You can make a sort of late-game control shell work or maybe a pure aggro work, but those are very niche and hard to get drafts. For Blood, it's sort of hard to really gauge what you want because the quality of cards has really fallen off as the expansions have gone on. We have like aggressive decks. You can try to get a high-value mid-range deck if you can. For mid-range, you sort of want to have as low self-burn as possible because if you burn yourself for maybe like 4 or 5 damage, that just invites crafts like Sword and Forest to sort of just beat you off just hitting face and ignoring your value. And sometimes you can even draft some cool combos, maybe like Dark Feast Bat. You can get like a high damage Dark Feast Bat or even the new Rose Queen, stuff like that. Even along other crafts, you can draft some cool combos from them. For Haven, we got stuff like Control of Lions. That's probably the thing you'll see the most. It's just hardcore, control the board, and then in the end have maybe 2-3 lions and just finish the game off by storming lions or just grinding infinite value. And then even just pure control without a win condition, stuff like, Sword, which may or may not be very strong in the format. It can just bully it out of the format by just controlling the board over and over again and just keep removing the threats you have. And eventually you just stick something mid-range and you just win the game from there. You don't really need a pure win con in order to win that. And then even like sometimes the old high roll amulet mid-range where you just dump a bunch of amulets on board and then they just eventually proc and then you have just an explosive board that the opponents can't deal with. That sometimes works in Arena as well. For Portalcraft, we have stuff like their hybrid mid-range good stuff. You see a lot of artifacts in that, puppets in that, and then a bunch of good stuff cards in that. And usually that's the most successful sort of Portalcraft deck you can build. But sometimes even heavy artifact control. It's a lot harder to build now with the rotation of CG and a lot of their artifact tutors and high artifact shuffler cards. But you can still sometimes make it work. Even stuff like Puppet Aggro, like it's very hard because you don't have as much value, but you can try making an aggressive or mid-range Puppet deck to work. So a rewarding grind. So what's the point of doing this if you don't get a lot of rewards doing this, right? So it pays to go infinite. You can slowly push up your win rate. It's going to be a struggle at first, but you can definitely increase your win rate as you play more. We have it pretty good right now because we have a non-MMR based matchmaking. So you can just match up with a bunch of maybe really good people, but you can also match up against a bunch of really bad people or beginners, and you can get your wins that way. But consistency is possible in the long run. As you keep playing, you'll definitely get better, and the win rate will go up, and it'll stabilize, and you can definitely get a lot of gold and rewards that way. So starting off with a bunch of gold or arena ticket cushion, it's pretty easy to just go pseudo infinite, complementing gold rewards and dailies. It's not as hard as it sounds. You can start with 0 to 1 runs a day, and then build up to something like 2 or 3 plus if you really want to go hardcore into it. Maybe you want to go for leaderboards, or you're really just farming rewards, or maybe this just replace constructed altogether. So a really cool thing you can do is just build decks from nothing, completing playstats of constructed viable legendaries. You can save up on vials and staples when the formats are dull. Maybe I don't want to play constructed during this format. I'll just farm take 2 and just get a bunch of vials or get a bunch of cards, and I can build decks during another constructed format. Farming leaders, animated cards, and Sears globes. You can get a bunch of leaders since the 4 most recent rotation packs are now always going to be filled with leaders. Animated cards, a bunch of silvers and bronzes see a lot of play, and you might want to pimp out your deck that way. Or Sears globes, you can waste 3,000 vials if you grind a lot of take 2, and you can get 1 or 2 every expansion if you play a lot. And just getting 471 vials, just the average off booster packs, and it can add up over time over the course of many runs. You can see people getting 1, 2, 3 packs a day just for free off playing take 2 a bunch. So to sum up, wrapping this up, I did an introduction to this channel, just the content I aim to push out, future plans, eventually trying to push out a website, presenting an alternative to the constructed formats out there. Hopefully it gives you some inspiration to play the format more. Just a quick introduction about what the style of gameplay is about, and just suggestions about draft archetypes and what to look for. I highlight the basic rewards for playing, but you might say, wow, this is very bare bones, and real and in-depth content is coming soon, so stay tuned.